My name is Heather Morrison, and the day my son called me after 22 years of silence, it wasn't to say he missed me. It wasn't to ask how I'd survived. It was to invite me to his wedding so I could sit in the back row and prove to his new family that everything he'd told them about me was true. I'm getting married, Lucas said, his voice flat, emotionless. August 15th, the Grandview Estate in Lake Forest. I stood in my penthouse office phone pressed against my ear, Chicago's skyline stretching endlessly beyond the glass. My hand trembled slightly, not from fear, from the weight of 22 years collapsing into a single moment. Of course you'll want to be there, he continued, and I could hear the sneer threading through his words even across the phone line. Vanessa's father insists on inviting my entire family, so I'm calling. Don't embarrass me, Heather. Heather, not Mom, not Mother, just my first name spoken like I was a stranger who'd inconvenienced him. For a moment I let his words settle in the silence between us. If I were still the woman he believed me to be, the convicted felon, the abandoned mother, the wretched woman they'd branded me, those words would have shattered me. They would have sent me back into the darkness I'd clawed my way out of. But that Heather Morrison died in a prison cell 22 years ago. I'll be there, I said quietly, and hung up before he could respond. I set the phone down on my mahogany desk next to the stack of legal documents I'd been reviewing. Property deeds, investment portfolios, and underneath it all, a manila folder marked Morrison versus Morrison, case reopening. My reflection stared back at me from the darkened window. 58 years old, silver hair cut sharp at my shoulders, navy suit that cost more than my first car, pearl earrings that once would have been impossible dreams. I wasn't the woman Lucas remembered, and August 15th would be the day he finally learned the truth. To understand why my son spoke my name like poison, you need to walk back with me to the moment everything shattered. To the day they led me away in handcuffs while my 6-year-old boy screamed for me from the doorway. It was October 2003, 22 years ago, but I remember it like yesterday, the way trauma brands itself into your bones and refuses to let go. I was 36 years old then, working as the bookkeeper for Morrison Trucking Company. It wasn't a glamorous job, but it was steady. Jack Morrison, my husband, had inherited the business from his father. 3 trucks, a small warehouse on the south side, and a reputation for reliable local deliveries. What Jack inherited in trucks he lacked in business sense, or restraint, or honesty. But I didn't know that yet. I thought I'd married a good man from a respectable family. His mother, Dorothy Morrison, ran the company finances before Jack took over. She was 82 now, confined to a wheelchair, but back then she was a forced, sharp-eyed, sharp-tongued, and absolutely convinced that I wasn't good enough for her son. "She's not our kind, Jack," I'd overheard her say at our wedding reception, her voice carrying across the small VFW hall. "Black poor, and she's got that look. Calculating. Mark my words, she's after the business." I'd brushed it off then. Told myself that love would win out, that I'd prove her wrong through hard work and dedication. What I didn't understand was that Dorothy Morrison didn't need proof. She'd already decided who I was, and no amount of devotion would change her mind. For 6 years I kept the books clean. Tracked every invoice, every payment, every mile logged. I stayed up late reconciling accounts when Jack's gambling debts started appearing in the margins. Cash withdrawals he couldn't explain, receipts from casinos 2 states over. "It's just entertainment, Heather," he'd say, kissing my forehead like I was a child who wouldn't understand. "I've got it under control." He didn't have it under control. By 2003, Morrison Trucking was hemorrhaging money. Jack had taken out loans against the trucks themselves, borrowed from people whose names I recognized from crime reports. When the interest came due and the business couldn't pay, he did what desperate men do. He looked for someone else to blame. Or rather, Dorothy did. I remember the morning the FBI agents arrived. I was making breakfast pancakes for Lucas, coffee for Jack. Lucas was at the table drawing trucks with crayons, his tongue sticking out in concentration, the way it always did when he was focused. The knock was heavy, official. Jack opened the door and 2 agents in dark suits stepped into our small kitchen. One of them, a woman with kind eyes that didn't match her rigid posture, looked directly at me. "Heather Morrison, yes. You're under arrest for wire fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy to commit financial crimes. You have the right to remain silent." The words blurred together. Lucas's crayon clattered to the floor. He was crying, screaming, "Mommy, Mommy!" as one agent pulled my hands behind my back and snapped cold metal around my wrists. I looked at Jack, begged him with my eyes to say something to tell them this was a mistake to defend me the way a husband should. He looked away. Dorothy appeared in the doorway, her face a mask of grim satisfaction. She pulled Lucas back as I struggled, shielding his eyes like I was something contaminated. "Don't touch that criminal," she hissed at my son. "She's not your mother anymore." "Jack!" I screamed as they dragged me toward the door. "Jack, tell them you know I didn't do this, Jack." He stood frozen, silent, a statue of a man who'd once promised to love and protect me. And in that moment, I understood he wasn't going to save me. He was going to let them take me, let them destroy me, let me become the scapegoat for his failures and his mother's hatred. The last thing I saw before they pushed me into the police car was Lucas's face in the window, streaked with tears, mouth open in a wail I could no longer hear through the glass. That image has lived in my mind every single day since. My baby boy, 6 years old, watching his mother being taken away, not understanding, not knowing that the people he trusted most in the world had just fed him the first lie in a lifetime of lies about who I really was. The trial was a formality. Dorothy Morrison had money connections and 22 years of community standing. I had a court-appointed lawyer who could barely remember my name and a stack of documents that had been expertly falsified. Signatures that looked like mine but weren't. Bank accounts opened in my name that I'd never seen. Witnesses, Dorothy's former secretary, a warehouse manager Jack had hired, who testified that they'd seen me taking cash, moving money, orchestrating the whole scheme. "Mrs. Morrison embezzled over $200,000, the prosecutor declared, her voice ringing through the courtroom. She used her position of trust to systematically drain this family business. She showed no remorse, no conscience. She chose greed over her own child. I wanted to scream, to stand up and tell them all the truth, that Jack was the gambler, that Dorothy had orchestrated this, that I'd done nothing but work myself to exhaustion for a family that never wanted me in the first place. But who would believe me? A black woman with no money and no power against the Morrison family legacy. The judge sentenced me to 8 years in federal prison. Jack was awarded full custody of Lucas. And Dorothy made sure that every letter I sent, every phone call I attempted, every birthday card I mailed, none of it ever reached my son. I became a ghost. The wretched woman, the criminal mother who'd abandoned her child for money. And Lucas, raised by the very people who'd stolen me from him, learned to hate me with every fiber of his being. The first night in prison, I didn't sleep. I couldn't. The sounds were wrong metal doors, clanging women, crying guards' footsteps, echoing down concrete corridors. The mattress was thin as paper, the pillow hard as stone. But none of that compared to the weight pressing against my chest. The knowledge that somewhere in Chicago, Lucas was going to bed without me, without my voice singing "You Are My Sunshine," the way I'd done every night since he was born, without my hand smoothing his hair back from his forehead, without me. I wondered if Dorothy had already started poisoning him against me, if she'd begun the slow, methodical process of erasing me from his heart. The answer I would learn was yes. Prison strips you bare. Not just of your freedom, but of your illusions about who you are and what you're capable of enduring. I'd been soft before soft in the way women are taught to be. Accommodating, quiet, grateful for whatever scraps of affection came my way. Prison taught me hardness. The first 6 months I clung to hope like a drowning woman. I wrote letters to Lucas every week. 47 letters in those first 6 months alone, each one carefully worded so a 6-year-old could understand. "Dear Lucas, Mommy loves you very much. I think about you every single day. I'm sorry I can't be there to tuck you in at night, but I hope you know that I'm always with you in your heart. When you look at the stars, I'm looking at the same stars and thinking of you. I'll be home soon, baby. I promise. Love, Mommy." I never got a single response. Mother's Day came that first spring. I spent the morning sitting by the mailroom waiting. Surely Dorothy wouldn't be cruel enough to keep a Mother's Day card from reaching me. Surely Jack would let Lucas send something, a crayon drawing, a photograph, anything. Nothing came. I asked the guard 3 times if there'd been a mistake. She looked at me with pity and shook her head. The second Mother's Day, I didn't wait by the mailroom. I already knew. By the third Mother's Day, I stopped expecting anything at all. I learned to keep my face blank while other women wept over cards and pictures from their children. I learned to swallow the grief that rose like bile in my throat every time I heard a child's voice during visiting hours. Lucas never came to visit. Not once in 8 years. I hired lawyers when I could afford them, which wasn't often on prison wages of 11 cents an hour. They all told me the same thing: the evidence against me was substantial, the witnesses credible, my chances of appeal nearly zero. Sometimes the system gets it wrong, one lawyer told me, her voice sympathetic but final. But proving that is almost impossible. I'm sorry, Mrs. Morrison. You need to focus on serving your time and rebuilding when you get out. So that's what I did. I focused on survival. I worked in the prison library shelving books and learning to disappear into their pages. I took every educational course they offered, accounting ironic, given my conviction, business management, computer literacy. I studied women who'd succeeded against impossible odds. I read everything I could find about real estate investing, entrepreneurship. Other women in prison numbed themselves with whatever contraband they could find. Pills, homemade alcohol, violence. I numbed myself with knowledge. Because somewhere deep in the pit of my chest, beneath the grief and the rage and the crushing loneliness, a small flame still burned. They had taken everything from me. My freedom, my son, my name, my future. But they couldn't take my mind. They couldn't take my will to survive. And I swore to myself in the darkness of my cell that one day I would rise from these ashes. One day I would stand before the people who'd destroyed me and show them exactly who Heather Morrison really was. Not a criminal, not a victim, not wretched, but a woman forged in fire, harder and stronger than they could ever imagine. I just had to survive long enough to get there. The day I walked out of prison, the sky felt different. Too wide, too bright. After 8 years of concrete walls and narrow windows, the openness of the world was almost violent. I stood outside the gates with a plastic bag containing $73 a bus ticket to Chicago, and the clothes on my back, state-issued jeans and a t-shirt that had been washed so many times the fabric felt like tissue paper. No one was waiting for me. Jack didn't come. Lucas didn't come. Even Aunt Pearl, my only living relative, was too sick with pneumonia to make the trip. She'd sent word through a friend, "I'm sorry, baby. I'll see you when I can." So I took the bus alone, watching Illinois roll past the window cornfields and small towns, and eventually the sprawl of Chicago's suburbs. I wondered if I'd pass by Lucas's school, if I'd see him without him seeing me, if he was tall now, or if he still had that gap between his front teeth that made his smile crooked. The bus dropped me at Union Station. From there, I made my way to a halfway house on the west side. $32 a night for a bed in a room with 5 other women. Curfew at 9 p.m. Mandatory check-ins. Random drug tests. I'd traded one cage for another, only this one let me walk outside during the day. Finding work with a felony conviction is like trying to climb a glass wall. You can see what's on the other side. Decent jobs, stability, dignity, but every time you reach for it, you slide back down. Have you ever been convicted of a felony? Check yes and watch the interviewer's face change. Watch the polite smile freeze, and the questions become shorter, more clipped. Watch them shuffle your application to the bottom of the pile while thanking you for your time. I took what I could get. I scrubbed toilets at a motel where the manager paid under the table and didn't ask questions. I flipped burgers at a diner during lunch rush, my feet aching in shoes held together with duct tape. I cleaned office buildings after hours, pushing a mop down empty hallways while security guards watched me with suspicious eyes. Some nights I was so tired I'd fall asleep on the bus ride back to the halfway house. I'd wake up at the end of the line, disoriented and alone, having to wait another hour for the return bus. But I didn't quit. I couldn't afford to. Every penny I earned, I split 3 ways: rent, food, and savings. I ate ramen noodles and day-old bread from the dollar store. I walked instead of taking the bus when I could. I wore the same 3 shirts and 2 pairs of jeans until they were threadbare, washing them in the bathroom sink to save quarters on the laundromat. The shame followed me everywhere. At the grocery store, I'd catch former neighbors whispering. At the bus stop, I overheard 2 women talking. That's her, Heather Morrison, the one who went to prison. The one who stole from her own husband. Left her little boy behind. Can you imagine? I wanted to scream at them, to tell them the truth. But what good would it do? They'd already decided who I was. So I kept my head down and kept moving forward. The turning point came in a break room. I was cleaning offices for a tech startup downtown, one of those companies full of 20-somethings in hoodies who worked 18-hour days and left cold pizza everywhere. I was mopping the break room floor at 3 a.m. when I overheard two young women talking while they waited for code to compile. "I made $600 last weekend," one of them said, scrolling through her phone. "Seriously, how Airbnb? I rented out my apartment while I stayed at my boyfriend's place. Some couple from Germany paid $300 a night. Easiest money I've ever made." I froze mid-mop listening. "That's genius," the other woman said. "I should do that. My apartment just sits empty half the time anyway." They kept talking, but I'd already stopped listening. My mind was racing. Rent out your apartment. To strangers. For money. It sounded too good to be true. But desperation makes you willing to try things that sound impossible. The next morning, I went to the public library and searched for Airbnb on the computer. What I found was simply a platform where people could list their homes for short-term rental. Travelers needed places to stay. Hosts needed income. The company connected them. I stared at the screen for a long time. I lived in a one-bedroom apartment in a not great neighborhood. The carpet was stained. The walls were thin. The view from my window was of a parking lot and a liquor store. Who would possibly want to stay there? But then I thought, what do I have to lose? I borrowed a friend's camera. I cleaned my apartment until it gleamed, scrubbed every surface, washed every dish, arranged the few pieces of furniture I had to look intentional rather than sparse. I took photos in the best light I could find, making that sad little apartment look almost charming. I listed it for $45 a night. Lower than most of the other listings in Chicago, but I needed someone to take a chance on me. 3 days later, I got my first booking. A couple passing through Chicago for a wedding. They needed a place for one night. They handed me $45 in cash, slept in my bed while I slept on the couch, and left me a 5-star review that made my hands shake when I read it. Heather was an excellent host. The apartment was clean and comfortable. Great value for the price. Would definitely stay again. $45. It was more than I made in a full day of scrubbing toilets. And suddenly I saw it. The path forward. The way out. My apartment wasn't just a place I survived in. It was an asset. And if I was smart, if I worked harder than I'd ever worked, I could turn that asset into something more. I became obsessed. Every spare moment I studied. How to take better photos. How to write compelling descriptions. How to price competitively. How to handle difficult guests. How to turn one listing into two into five into a portfolio. I scavenged furniture from thrift stores and alleyways. A table someone threw out became a desk with some sandpaper and paint. Curtains from Goodwill transformed the windows. Artwork printed at the library and framed in cheap frames from the dollar store made the walls look intentional. My apartment filled up with bookings. Weekends, weekdays, last-minute travelers, business people passing through. I managed it all from my flip phone, responding to messages between my cleaning jobs, rushing home to check guests in and out. The money trickled in. $50 here, $80 there. By the end of the first month, I'd made $400. By the third month, $800. I saved every penny I could spare. When my lease ended, I didn't renew. I found a 2-bedroom apartment instead, bigger, slightly nicer, in a marginally better neighborhood. I took the smaller bedroom for myself and furnished the larger one specifically for guests. That one listing became my full-time income. Within 6 months, I'd saved enough to quit the motel cleaning job. Within a year, I quit everything except Airbnb hosting. I was meticulous, obsessive. Every review mattered. Every guest experience was carefully managed. I learned to anticipate needs before guests asked. Fresh flowers in a vase. Local restaurant recommendations printed on cardstock. A basket of snacks and bottled water. Small touches that made people feel welcomed. That made them leave 5-star reviews. That made them recommend me to their friends. The reviews piled up. The bookings increased. The money grew. By year 2, I had enough saved to make a down payment on a small house in a neighborhood that was up-and-coming real estate speak for currently rough but gentrifying. I bought it for $28,000. It needed work. The roof leaked. The kitchen was from 1970. The bathroom tiles were cracked. But the bones were good. I spent 3 months renovating it myself. YouTube became my teacher. I learned to patch drywall, install tile paint trim. I worked until my hands blistered and my back screamed, but I kept going. When I finished, I listed the entire house on Airbnb. It booked solid for 6 months straight. The profit from that house bought me a second property, then a third, then a fourth. I learned the real estate market like I'd once learned prison survival, carefully, methodically looking for edges and opportunities that others missed. I targeted neighborhoods before they became trendy. I negotiated hard with sellers who were desperate. I managed every property myself, keeping costs low and quality high. By 2015, I had 12 properties across Chicago. By 2017, I'd expanded into Houston and Charlotte. By 2020, I was operating 47 short-term rentals, generating consistent six-figure annual profit. I did all of it under the business name Pearl Properties, named for Aunt Pearl, the only person who'd never doubted me. The LLC was in her name initially, both to honor her and to keep my own name out of public records. Because I wasn't ready yet. I wasn't ready for Jack to know, for Dorothy to find out, for Lucas to discover that the criminal mother he despised had built an empire from nothing. I wanted to stay invisible, to grow in the shadows, to become so undeniably successful that when the truth finally came to light, there would be no argument, no debate, no way to dismiss or diminish what I'd accomplished. I wanted to rise so high that when they finally looked up, they'd have to shield their eyes from the glare. And I wanted Lucas to see it, to understand what he'd been taught to despise, to realize that the woman called wretched had never been wretched at all. She'd been broken. She'd been wronged. She'd been stolen from and lied about. But she'd survived. And she'd won. But money, I learned, doesn't heal every wound. I could walk into any restaurant in Chicago and not look at the prices. I could buy a car without financing. I could wear clothes that actually fit, that weren't threadbare or borrowed or stained. But I couldn't stop looking for Lucas in every young man I passed on the street. A certain tilt of the head. A laugh that sounded familiar. The way someone stood with their hands in their pockets, shifting weight from foot to foot, that was Lucas's nervous habit when he was little. My heart would stop, my breath would catch, and then the person would turn and it wouldn't be him, and I'd have to force myself to keep walking while grief clawed at my chest. I hired a private investigator. Not to contact Lucas, I wasn't ready for that, but to know, to have information, to fill in the blank years. The reports came monthly, clinical, factual, devastating. Lucas Morrison, age 14, attending Lincoln Park High School, honor roll, plays basketball, lives with Father Jack Morrison and grandmother Dorothy Morrison at address redacted. Lucas Morrison, age 16, accepted to University of Illinois, planning to study marketing. Recently started dating a classmate named Jennifer. Lucas Morrison, age 22, graduated with honors. Accepted position at tech marketing firm. Relationship with Jennifer ended. Currently single. Lucas Morrison, age 25, promoted to senior account manager. Dating Vanessa Parker, daughter of real estate investor David Parker. Relationship appears serious. Each report was a window into a life I wasn't part of. A son who'd grown up without me, who'd learned to drive without me teaching him, who'd graduated without me in the audience, who'd fallen in love without me meeting the girl. The pie couldn't tell me what I really wanted to know. Did Lucas ever ask about me? Did he ever wonder if the story he'd been told was true? Did he miss me even a little? Or had Dorothy's poison worked so completely that I was erased from his heart? I drove past his apartment sometimes, late at night when I couldn't sleep and the empty spaces in my chest felt too large to contain. I'd park across the street and look up at his windows, watching shadows move behind curtains. I never knocked, never called, never sent a letter. Because I knew with the certainty of a mother who'd already lost everything once that if I reached out before he was ready, I'd lose him all over again. So I waited and watched from a distance and built my empire in silence. Aunt Pearl was the only one who knew the full truth. She was 70 now, her health declining, but her mind sharp as ever. We'd sit in her small kitchen drinking tea, and she'd look at me with eyes that saw too much. "Baby," she said once, her weathered hand covering mine, "you've built all this, but you're still chained to that boy. You're still waiting for him to see you. He's my son, Aunt Pearl. I know, but he's also a grown man who believes lies about you. You can't force him to see the truth. You can't make him love you. I'm not trying to make him love me. My voice broke. I just want him to know I never left him. I was taken from him. There's a difference." Pearl squeezed my hand. "There is, but will he hear it? Or will he just hear a woman making excuses?" I didn't have an answer. The truth was, I didn't know if Lucas would ever believe me. I didn't know if 22 years of lies could be undone with evidence and explanations, but I had to try. Because I wasn't just fighting for my relationship with my son anymore. I was fighting for my name, my reputation, my truth. And on August 15th at his wedding, I would stop hiding in the shadows. I would step into the light, wealthy, successful, undeniable, and force everyone who'd dismissed me, everyone who'd called me wretched, everyone who'd counted me as dead and buried to see what they'd tried to destroy. I would arrive as a ghost, the ghost of their lies, the ghost of their guilt, the ghost of the woman who refused to stay buried. And Lucas, standing at that altar with his perfect bride and his perfect new family, would finally have to face the truth he'd spent 22 years running from. His mother wasn't a crimin. March 2025. 3 months before Lucas's wedding invitation would shatter my carefully constructed silence. I was inspecting one of my properties in Wicker Park, a 3-bedroom Victorian I'd renovated the year before. The tenant had just checked out, and I needed to assess what cleaning needed to be done before the next booking. I let myself in with my key, expecting the usual post-guest chaos. Instead, I found the place immaculate. Better than immaculate. The tenant had left a handwritten note on the kitchen counter next to a bottle of wine. Thank you for a wonderful month. Your home was exactly what I needed during a difficult transition. Sarah. I was reading the note when I heard footsteps on the stairs. I turned to find a woman in her early 40s descending tall with short gray hair and sharp, intelligent eyes. She carried a laptop bag and a cardboard box of what looked like research materials. Ms. Morrison, she said, extending her hand. I'm Sarah Williams. I was just gathering the last of my things. You didn't have to clean, I said, shaking her hand. That's included in the service. I know, but I'm particular about how I leave spaces. She paused, studying my face in a way that made me uncomfortable. You're Heather Morrison, not just the owner of Pearl Properties. My body went rigid. I don't know what you mean. Yes, you do. Her voice was gentle but firm. I'm a detective. Retired Chicago PD. I've been staying here while I work on a book about wrongful convictions in Cook County. She gestured to the box. Your case is in here. The world tilted slightly. My case? Morrison versus State of Illinois, 2003. You were convicted of embezzlement and wire fraud. Sentenced to 8 years at Danville. She set the box down on the kitchen counter. And I believe you were innocent. I couldn't speak. For 22 years, no one, not a single person outside Aunt Pearl, had said those words to me. Sarah pulled a thick folder from the box and opened it on the counter. I started reviewing cold cases 2 years ago. Yours kept bothering me. The evidence was too clean, too perfect. And the witnesses, she shook her head. Their testimonies read like scripts. Why? The word came out as a whisper. Why would you care about a case from 22 years ago? Because the system gets it wrong more often than we like to admit, and because I've learned to recognize the fingerprints of a frame job. She spread documents across the counter. Look at this. The signature analysis from your trial, the prosecution's expert said these matched your handwriting, but I had them re-examined by a forensic document specialist. 3 of the key signatures on the loan documents forged. My hands shook as I picked up the analysis report. Technical language about pen pressure, stroke patterns, hesitation marks, and at the bottom, a conclusion that made my vision blur. It is my professional opinion that the questioned signatures were not made by the same hand as the known exemplars. Evidence suggests deliberate simulation of the subject's handwriting by another party. I don't understand, I said. This was available during my trial. No, this is new analysis using updated technology. Sarah pulled out another document. But this should have been available and it wasn't. Bank records showing that the secret account in your name was opened from an IP address traced back to Morrison Trucking's office, on a day when you were documented as being at a doctor's appointment across town. She kept laying out evidence like cards in a game I'd already lost, except now she was showing me the deck had been stacked from the beginning. Dorothy Morrison's former secretary, Patricia Hayes, came forward 6 months ago. She's dying lung cancer. Wanted to clear her conscience. Sarah handed me a sworn affidavit. She admits Dorothy paid her $50,000 to testify that she saw you moving money into personal accounts. She also admits she helped Dorothy forge your signatures on multiple documents. I sank into a chair, the papers clutched in my hands. 22 years. I spent 8 years in prison. I lost my son, my life, everything. And you're telling me someone knew. Patricia Hayes knew. She's been living with the guilt ever since. And I suspect your ex-husband Jack knew, or at least suspected, but chose Dorothy's money over the truth. Sarah sat across from me, her expression sympathetic but professional. I've documented everything. I've got witness statements, forensic evidence, timeline discrepancies. Heather, we can reopen your case. We can get you exonerated. The word felt foreign. Exonerated. Cleared. Vindicated. How long would it take? I asked. 18 months, maybe 2 years. The legal system doesn't move quickly, even with compelling new evidence. 2 years. Lucas would be married by then, maybe have children. Another lifetime would pass while lawyers argued and judges deliberated. I can't wait 2 years, I said quietly. Sarah frowned. I understand you want justice, but these things take time. My son is getting married in 5 months. He's been told his entire life that I'm a criminal who abandoned him. He called me 3 days ago, the first time I've heard his voice in 22 years, and you know what he said? Don't embarrass me. My voice broke, but I forced myself to continue. I've built a life, a real life. I have money, property, respect. But to Lucas, I'm still the wretched woman who chose crime over him. I can't wait 2 years for a judge to tell him what I've known all along. I need to show him now. Sarah was quiet for a long moment. What are you planning? I'm going to that wedding, not as a convicted felon begging for scraps of acknowledgement, but as the woman they tried to destroy, risen successful, and carrying the truth they tried to bury. That's risky. If you confront them publicly before the exoneration is official. I'm not confronting them. I'm just going to be present, undeniable. And when the time is right, I'll speak my truth. Let them try to deny it when I'm standing there in the flesh, proof that I survived everything they did to me. Sarah studied me, then slowly nodded. You're not looking for permission. You're looking for ammunition. Yes. She gathered the documents and put them back in order. Okay, I'll expedite the filing for case reopening. I'll make sure the media knows about the new evidence. And I'll be at that wedding if you want a witness to what really happened. You do that, Heather. I became a cop because I believed in justice. I became a detective because I believed in truth. And I'm writing this book because I believe the system needs to be held accountable when it fails people. She met my eyes. What happened to you was a failure. A terrible, deliberate failure. The least I can do is stand with you when you demand accountability. For the first time in 22 years, I felt something I'd almost forgotten: hope. Not the desperate, clinging hope of my prison years, but the solid, grounded hope of someone who finally had allies, evidence, and a path forward. Thank you, I whispered. Sarah smiled. Thank me by the name Vanessa Parker had been in my private investigator's reports for 3 years. Lucas's girlfriend, then fiancée, daughter of David Parker, prominent Chicago real estate investor. What the PI hadn't told me, what I discovered only when I started researching David Parker more carefully, was that I already knew him. In 2015, when I was expanding Pearl Properties beyond Chicago, I'd attended a real estate investment conference in Atlanta. It was the first time I'd stepped into that world as a peer rather than a servant. I wore a suit I'd bought specifically for the occasion, my hair styled professionally, my business cards crisp and new. I'd felt like an imposter the entire time. During a workshop on multifamily property investment, a man in his 50s had taken the seat next to me. He'd introduced himself as David Parker, asked thoughtful questions during the presentation, and afterwards struck up a conversation about the Chicago market. You're local? He'd asked. Yes, I operate short-term rentals primarily, but I'm looking to diversify. Smart. The short-term market is strong, but it's volatile. You need long-term holds to balance your portfolio. He'd handed me his card. I focus on commercial properties, but I've got some residential contacts who might be useful to you. If you're ever looking for partnership opportunities, give me a call. We'd stayed in touch professionally. Over the next 2 years, David had connected me with contractors, property managers, and even co-invested in a small apartment building in Houston. He was generous with his knowledge, never condescending, and treated me like an equal in an industry that rarely extended that courtesy to Black women with prison records. He knew me as Pearl, the owner of Pearl Properties, a savvy, hardworking investor with an eye for undervalued properties. He had no idea Pearl was Heather Morrison, the convicted felon, the mother his future son-in-law had erased from his life story. When I made the connection, when I realized that my son was marrying the daughter of a man I'd done business with, I laughed, a hard, bitter laugh that echoed through my empty penthouse. The universe, it seemed, had a sense of irony. I sat in my office that night staring at David Parker's business card, turning it over and over in my fingers. An idea was forming. Risky, potentially explosive, but also perfect. I picked up my phone and dialed. David Parker's office, a professional voice answered. This is Pearl from Pearl Properties. Is David available? A brief hold, then. David's warm voice came on the line. Pearl, it's been too long. How are you? I'm well, thank you. Listen, I'm calling to ask a rather unusual favor. Of course, what do you need? I took a breath. I understand your daughter is getting married soon. To Lucas Morrison. There was a pause. Yes. How did you know Lucas is my son David? The silence stretched long enough that I thought the call had dropped. Then your son. But Lucas said his mother was... He told us you had passed away years ago. I know what Lucas said, and I know why he said it. But I'm very much alive and I'd like to attend his wedding. I know this is complicated, but I was hoping you might help ensure I'm included on the guest list. Pearl, or should I say Heather? His voice was cautious now, confused. I don't understand. Why would Lucas tell us you were dead? It's a long story, one I'd prefer to tell in person if you're willing to meet. Another pause. I think you'd better come by my office, tomorrow if you're free. David Parker's office occupied the top floor of a building in the Loop. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked Lake Michigan, and the furniture was the kind of expensive minimalism that whispered wealth rather than shouting it. He stood when I entered, and I could see him trying to reconcile the woman he'd known as Pearl with the story Lucas must have told about his mother. His expression was carefully neutral, but his eyes were searching. Heather, he said, gesturing to a chair. Or do you prefer Pearl? Heather is fine. Pearl was a protective measure. Protection from what? I'd prepared for this conversation, but actually having it was harder than I'd anticipated. David, what did Lucas tell you about me? He sat down, choosing his words carefully. He said his mother had passed away when he was young, that he was raised by his father and grandmother. He didn't speak about it often, it seemed painful for him. Did he mention that I went to prison? David's eyes widened slightly. No, he never mentioned that. I was convicted of embezzlement and wire fraud in 2003. I served 8 years at Danville Correctional Center. Lucas was 6 years old when I was arrested. He spent his entire adult life believing I'm a criminal who abandoned him for money. And you're telling me you're innocent. I'm telling you I was framed by my ex-husband's family, and I can prove it. I pulled out a folder containing copies of Sarah Williams' evidence. A retired detective has been investigating wrongful convictions. She found evidence that the signatures attributed to me were forged, that witnesses were paid to lie, and that the entire case against me was fabricated by my former mother-in-law, Dorothy Morrison. I watched David's face as he reviewed the documents. He was a businessman. He knew how to read evidence, how to assess credibility. I could see the moment he began to believe me. This is substantial, he said finally. Have you filed for exoneration? The process has begun, but it takes time. And I don't have time, David. Lucas is getting married in 5 months. He's starting a life with your daughter while carrying lies about who I am and what I did. I need him to know the truth before he builds his future on that foundation. David set the papers down. What do you want from me? I want you to make sure I'm invited to the wedding. I know Lucas won't invite me willingly, but if you as the father of the bride insist that his family be included, he won't be able to refuse without explaining why. And he won't want to admit to you that he told everyone his mother was dead. You want to ambush him at his own wedding. I want to give him the truth at a moment when he can't run from it, when there are witnesses, when he'll have to confront the lies he's been living with. I leaned forward. David, I've spent 22 years being invisible, being erased, being called wretched and criminal and worthless. I built an empire from nothing, an empire you've profited from, by the way, and my own son doesn't even know I'm alive. I deserve to be seen. I deserve to speak my truth, and Lucas deserves to hear it. David was quiet for a long moment, his fingers drumming on the desk. If I do this and you're lying to me, if those documents are fabricated, and you really are guilty, you'll destroy my daughter's wedding day and damage my family's reputation. I understand. That's why I'm giving you time to verify everything I've told you. Talk to Detective Sarah Williams. Review the evidence independently. Hire your own forensic experts if you want. but do it quickly because I need an answer within 2 weeks." He studied me, and I could see him weighing risks and responsibilities. Finally, he nodded. "I'll look into it. If what you're saying is true, and I mean really true with evidence that holds up, then yes, I'll make sure you're invited. Vanessa deserves to know her fiancé's real history, and Lucas needs to face whatever he's been running from. Thank you." As I stood to leave, David said, "Pearl Heather, whatever happens at that wedding, be prepared for it to get ugly. Lucas has built his entire adult identity around a version of events where you're the villain. Challenging that will be like pulling the foundation out from under him." "I know, but the foundation was built on lies anyway. Better it collapses now than after he's made vows based on falsehoods." 2 weeks later, David Parker called. "I've verified everything. The forensic evidence is solid. Detective Williams is credible and thorough. And I found Patricia Hayes, Dorothy Morrison's former secretary. She confirmed everything in her affidavit." His voice was tight with controlled anger. "Heather, what they did to you was unconscionable. I'm sorry you went through that. And I'm sorry my future son-in-law has been complicit in perpetuating the lie. He was a child when it started. He didn't know any better." "He's not a child anymore. He's a man who should have questioned what he was told. Who should have tried to find you here your side." David sighed. "I'll make sure you're on the guest list. And I'll make sure Lucas knows that excluding you isn't an option. But Heather, when you walk into that wedding, you need to be prepared for war, because that's what it's going to be. I've been at war for 22 years, David. I'm ready." After I hung up, I sat in my office and began to plan. This wasn't just about showing up. It was about making a statement. About being so undeniable, so visibly successful, that every lie they'd told would crumble on contact with reality. I needed the right vehicle, the right outfit, the right entrance. I started with the car. I called a luxury dealership and ordered a Rolls-Royce Ghost Silver with black leather interior. Cost $387,000. Delivery 3 weeks. The salesman had tried to hide his surprise. A middle-aged black woman alone purchasing a Rolls-Royce in cash. I could see him recalculating his assumptions in real time. "It's for a special occasion," I told him, signing the papers. "It must be quite an occasion, Ms. Morrison." "It is. I'm going to my son's wedding." Next, I hired a personal stylist. Not just any stylist, the woman who dressed Chicago's elite for galas and charity events. I told her what I needed: elegant, powerful, age-appropriate, but striking. Something that said I've arrived without being ostentatious. She brought me a navy suit from Armani, perfectly tailored with subtle pinstriping that caught the light. A silk blouse in cream, Louboutin heels in navy patent leather, and a single strand of pearls that cost more than my first year of rent after prison. "You look like old money," she said approvingly. "Established, unshakable." Perfect. I hired 2 bodyguards not because I expected physical danger, but because presence matters. 2 well-dressed men in dark suits walking beside me would send a message. This is a woman of importance. A woman who has security. A woman who cannot be dismissed or ignored. I met with my lawyer, Richard Thompson, to review the timeline for the case reopening. "The hearing for exoneration is scheduled for September 28th, he told me. That's 6 weeks after the wedding. Will the media know about it before then? Not unless someone leaks it. Why? Because I want them to know. I want the pressure of public attention on this case before I walk into that wedding. Can you arrange a carefully timed press release? Something that goes out the week before the wedding." Richard raised an eyebrow. "You want maximum impact." "I want Dorothy Morrison to know that her lies are about to be exposed. I want Jack to sweat. And I want Lucas to see news reports about his mother's pending exoneration right before he has to see me in person." "That's aggressive. That's strategic. Can you do it?" He smiled. "Consider it done." I spent hours practicing what I would say, how I would stand, how I would respond to shock, to anger, to accusations. Aunt Pearl watched me rehearse one evening in her kitchen, shaking her head. "You're preparing for battle, baby." "That's because it is a battle." "No." She reached across the table and took my hand. "It's a reckoning. Battle implies 2 equal sides, but you're not equal to them anymore. You're above them. You've risen. Don't let them pull you back down to their level." "I'm not trying to be pulled down. I'm trying to pull my son up, to show him the truth. And if he can't handle the truth, if he chooses them over you, even after you show him everything." The question I'd been avoiding. The fear that woke me at 3 a.m. in a cold sweat. Then at least I'll know I tried. At least I'll have spoken my piece, and I can move forward knowing I didn't hide anymore. Pearl squeezed my hand. You're braver than I ever was. No, I'm just tired of being invisible. The call came on a Thursday afternoon in early June, 2 months before the wedding. I was in a meeting with contractors about a property renovation when my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I almost declined it, but something made me answer. Heather Morrison speaking. Claudette. The voice was sharp male cold, a voice I'd last heard as a child soprano now deepened to a man's tenor. It's Lucas. My heart stopped, then started again too fast. Lucas, I'm getting married, August 15th, the Grandview Estate in Lake Forest. I already knew this. David Parker had confirmed my invitation 2 weeks ago, but Lucas didn't know I knew. Congratulations, I managed. Vanessa's father insists on inviting you. He says family should be present. The words were bitter accusatory. I told him you weren't part of my family, that you gave up that right when you chose crime over being a mother. But he's paying for the wedding, so I don't get a say. Each word was a knife, precise, deliberate, designed to cut. So you're calling to uninvite me? No, I'm calling to set expectations. His voice was steel. You'll come. You'll sit in the back. You'll be quiet. And afterward, you'll leave and never contact me again. Vanessa's family wants to believe in reconciliation and healing, so we'll give them that performance. But we both know what you really are. And what am I, Lucas? A criminal, a liar, someone who cares more about money than her own child. The words should have destroyed me. Years ago they would have. But I'd been forged in fire. I'd survived worse than my son's hatred. I'll be there, I said quietly. But Lucas, when this is over, you're going to know the truth about what really happened, about who I really am. And then you'll have to decide whether you can live with what you did to me. What I did to you. His voice rose. You went to prison. You're a convicted felon. Don't try to rewrite history. I'm not rewriting anything. I'm revealing what was hidden. See you at the wedding, son. I hung up before he could respond. My hands were shaking. The contractors were staring at me. I excused myself, went to the bathroom and locked the door. Then I let myself cry. Not from pain, though there was pain, but from the sheer weight of finally being so close to the moment I'd been building toward for 22 years. Lucas hated me. That was clear. The venom in his voice, the certainty in his accusations, that was Dorothy's work. 22 years of carefully cultivated lies repeated until they became truth in my son's mind. But hate built on lies is fragile. It shatters when confronted with reality. And in 2 months, Lucas would be confronted with more reality than he could handle. I washed my face, reapplied my makeup, and returned to the meeting as if nothing had happened. Because that's what survivors do. We keep moving forward, even when it hurts, even when we're bleeding, even when our own children call us criminals and strangers. We keep moving forward. The week before the wedding, Richard Thompson's press release hit the news. Chicago woman to seek exoneration in 2003 fraud case. New evidence has emerged suggesting Heather Morrison, convicted of embezzlement in 2003, may have been wrongfully imprisoned. Forensic analysis reveals key signatures were forged, and witnesses have recanted their testimony claiming they were paid to lie by members of the Morrison family. A hearing is scheduled for September 28th. The story ran in the Chicago Tribune, the Sun-Times, and on 3 local news stations. Not front-page news, but visible enough. My phone exploded with messages. Former cellmates who'd heard the news. Acquaintances from my post-prison life. Journalists requesting interviews. I ignored them all except one, a text from David Parker. Lucas saw the news. He called me panicking, said it's lies and character assassination. I told him to talk to his grandmother. This is going to be messy. Good. Let it be messy. Let Lucas panic. Let Dorothy scramble to control the narrative. Because in 3 days I would walk into that wedding and all the scrambling in the world wouldn't save them from the truth. I spent the final 72 hours in careful preparation. I had my hair done silver, now cut into a sharp bob that framed my face. Professional, elegant, powerful. I had my nails manicured, navy polish to match the suit. I practiced my entrance in front of the mirror. How to step out of the Rolls-Royce with grace. How to walk with my head high, my shoulders back. How to look at people who'd dismissed me and let them truly see who I'd become. The night before the wedding, I couldn't sleep. I stood on my penthouse balcony looking out at Chicago's skyline, thinking about the journey from that prison cell to this moment. 8 years behind bars, 14 years building an empire, 22 years waiting for this reckoning. Tomorrow I would stop waiting. Tomorrow I would step out of the shadows and into the light. Tomorrow the wretched woman would become the ghost returning to haunt the lies that tried to bury her. The Grandview estate sat on 5 acres of manicured grounds in Lake Forest, Illinois. White tents billowed in the summer breeze. String lights were already hung waiting for evening. Gardens exploded with roses and hydrangeas in shades of white and cream. It was beautiful. The kind of wedding that cost 6 figures and made the society pages. My Rolls-Royce Ghost glided up the long driveway at 2:47 p.m., deliberately late enough that most guests had arrived early enough that the ceremony hadn't started. I could see people clustered on the lawn. Women in summer dresses and wide-brimmed hats. Men in linen suits. Champagne glasses catching the sunlight. My driver, a professional I'd hired specifically for today, pulled to a stop at the entrance. The sound of the engine, that distinctive Rolls-Royce purr, turned heads. My bodyguard stepped out first. Both well over 6 feet tall, both wearing dark suits and expressions that said they were not to be trifled with. Then I stepped out. I'd practiced this moment, but nothing could have prepared me for the actual sensation of it. Of being seen after 22 years of invisibility. Of claiming space in a world that had tried to erase me. The Navy Armani suit fit like armor. The Louboutins added 3 inches to my height. The pearls at my throat caught the light, and I knew that I looked like exactly what I'd become. Money, power, success, everything they'd tried to take from me. Gasps rippled through the crowd. I could see faces turning, mouths opening, whispers spreading like wildfire. Who is that? Is that a Rolls-Royce Ghost? That car costs $400,000. She looks like somebody important. I walked forward slowly, deliberately, my bodyguards flanking me, my heels clicking against the stone pathway. And then I saw them. Dorothy Morrison seated in a wheelchair at the edge of the lawn. Her face went from curious to shocked to absolutely white in the space of 3 seconds. Her mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. Jack Morrison stood next to her, holding a champagne flute that froze halfway to his lips. I watched recognition dawn in his eyes, watched him nearly drop the glass. And then, at the center of a cluster of guests, I saw Lucas, my son, 28 years old now, tall like his father with my eyes and my stubborn chin, handsome in his tuxedo, his arm around a beautiful young woman in an ivory dress, Vanessa, I assumed. He was laughing at something someone said. Happy, carefree. Then someone touched his shoulder and pointed at me. Lucas turned. Our eyes met across 50 feet of manicured lawn. I watched the color drain from his face. Watched his arm drop from around Vanessa's waist. Watched him stumble backward slightly as if he'd been physically struck. His mouth formed a word I couldn't hear, no, but I kept walking. Toward him. Toward the truth. Toward the reckoning we'd both been avoiding. People parted before me like water. Whispers grew louder. Is that his mother? I thought she was dead. Why does she have bodyguards? Look at her clothes, that's serious money. I reached Vanessa first. She stood frozen, her eyes wide, looking between Lucas and me with complete confusion. I extended my hand, my voice warm and controlled. You must be Vanessa. I'm Heather Morrison, Lucas's mother. Vanessa's hand moved automatically to shake mine, but her voice was bewildered. Lucas said you... I know what Lucas said, I replied, gently releasing her hand. And we'll have time to discuss that. But today is your wedding day. Congratulations, you look absolutely beautiful. David Parker appeared at my elbow, his face carefully neutral, but his eyes communicating volumes. Heather, welcome. Thank you for ensuring I was invited, David. Around us, the whispers intensified. I could feel eyes boring into me from every direction. Dorothy's voice cut through the noise, sharp and venomous, even from her wheelchair. Someone remove this woman from the premises. She's trespassing. She's not welcome here. I turned slowly to face my former mother-in-law. 22 years had aged her considerably, but the hatred in her eyes was as fresh as ever. I'm invited, Dorothy. By the father of the bride. I'm family whether you like it or not. You are not family, you're a criminal. The crowd had gone completely silent now, every eye fixed on the confrontation unfolding. I smiled, calm, controlled, unbothered. Then I suppose you haven't seen this week's news about the evidence proving my conviction was based on forged documents and paid witnesses, about the hearing scheduled for next month to formally exonerate me, about the investigation into who actually committed the fraud I was imprisoned for. I took a step closer to Dorothy's wheelchair. Should I tell all these nice people who that investigation is focused on Dorothy, or would you like to explain it yourself? Dorothy's face went from white to purple. You're lying. I'm trying to nothing. I'm simply stating facts. Facts that will be presented in court in 6 weeks. Facts that will clear my name and expose yours. Lucas finally found his voice. Stop. Just stop. He pushed through the crowd toward me, his face a mask of fury and confusion. What are you doing here? What is this? I turned to face my son. 22 years of separation. 22 years of lies. All of it compressed into this single moment. I'm here for your wedding, Lucas, just like you invited me. I didn't invite you. Vanessa's father forced you to acknowledge your own mother. How terrible for you. His hands clenched into fists. You have no right to be here. No right to ruin my day. I'm not ruining anything. I'm simply existing. If my presence ruins your day, perhaps you should ask yourself why. The wedding coordinator, a frazzled woman with a clipboard, rushed over to David Parker. Mr. Parker, we need to start the ceremony. The minister is ready and we're already 15 minutes behind schedule. David nodded, then turned to me. Heather, there's a seat reserved for you. Front row bride side. Front row, Lucas's voice rose. Absolutely not. If she insists on staying, she sits in the back. David's voice went cold in a way I'd never heard before. Lucas, this is my daughter's wedding paid for with my money. Heather Morrison is an invited guest and will sit where I designate. If that's a problem, we can cancel the entire event right now. Vanessa grabbed Lucas's arm. Please, can we get through the ceremony? We'll sort everything else out afterward. Lucas looked at his bride, at David, at me. I could see the war playing out in his eyes. Pride versus pragmatism. Hatred versus necessity. Pragmatism won. Fine, he spat, but afterward she leaves. I said nothing, simply followed the coordinator to my seat front row left side with a perfect view of the altar. As I sat down, I felt Dorothy's eyes burning into my back. Jack sat several rows behind his head, bowed, refusing to look at anyone. The guests took their seats, the whispers still buzzing. I could hear fragments. Went to prison. That's not true. Wrongful conviction. The news said. The ceremony began. The minister took his place. The bridesmaids and groomsmen processed down the aisle. And then Vanessa appeared, walking beside her father. She looked beautiful, but her eyes were red and I could see tear tracks on her cheeks, hastily covered with makeup. I'd done that. My presence had made this bride cry on her wedding day. Guilt stabbed through me, sharp and unexpected. But I pushed it down. This pain was temporary. The truth was permanent. Lucas stood at the altar, his back rigid, his jaw clenched. He didn't look at me once during the entire ceremony. The minister began, Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today. I barely heard the words. I was too focused on Lucas. On the set of his shoulders, the tension in his hands, the way he kept swallowing like he might be sick. This was my son, my baby boy, and he hated me. The minister reached the traditional moment. If anyone here has reason why these two should not be joined in holy matrimony, speak now or forever hold your peace. The entire crowd held its breath. 200 people turning slightly to look at me. Lucas's shoulders went even more rigid. I smiled slightly and remained perfectly still. The moment passed. Then, by the power vested in me, the ceremony concluded. Lucas and Vanessa were pronounced husband and wife. They kissed brief, awkward nothing like the joyful embrace this moment should have been. As they walked back down the aisle, Lucas's eyes finally met mine. I saw fear there, and anger, and something else I couldn't quite identify. Maybe, just maybe, the first crack in his certainty. The reception tent glowed with thousands of tiny lights as dusk settled over Lake Forest. Round tables draped in ivory linens surrounded a polished dance floor. A string quartet played softly in the corner. Waiters circulated with champagne and hors d'oeuvres. It should have been magical. Instead, the atmosphere crackled with tension so thick you could taste it. I sat at a table near the front again, David Parker's insistence. Around me sat people I didn't know who eyed me with a mixture of curiosity and discomfort. Conversations died when I approached. Smiles became forced. I was the ghost at the feast, the uninvited truth crashing the carefully constructed lie. Across the tent, Lucas stood with Vanessa accepting congratulations from a steady stream of guests, but his eyes kept darting to me, checking, waiting, dreading whatever came next. Dorothy's wheelchair had been positioned at a table with Jack and several elderly relatives. She sat rigid, her hands gripping the armrests, her face a mask of barely controlled fury. Every few minutes, she'd lean over and whisper something to Jack, who would nod miserably and avoid looking in my direction. I sipped champagne and waited. The moment would come. It always did. At every wedding, there came a time for speeches, for toasts, for family to stand and speak about the couple. And I had things to say. The dinner service began. Salad, then fish, then beef tenderloin that probably cost more than I used to make in a month. I ate slowly, methodically, while conversations swirled around me. I heard she went to prison. 22 years ago, apparently. But there's new evidence now. Dorothy Morrison looks like she's seen a ghost. Well, in a way she has. Between courses, David Parker approached my table. "How are you holding up?" he asked quietly. "I've survived worse than uncomfortable stares. Lucas is falling apart. Vanessa's trying to hold him together, but..." He shook his head. "I'm not sure this was the right venue for this confrontation, Heather." "There is no right venue. If I'd approached Lucas privately, he would have refused to see me. If I'd waited until after the wedding, the lies would have cemented further. This was the only moment where he couldn't run, couldn't ignore me, couldn't pretend I don't exist. You're probably right, but that doesn't make it any easier to watch." David glanced toward the head table. "Be gentle with him if you can. He's learning that his entire foundation was built on lies. That's not easy for anyone. I'll be as gentle as the truth allows." After dinner, the best man stood to give a toast. A college friend of Lucas's named Brandon, who told charming stories about their fraternity days and made everyone laugh. Then Vanessa's maid of honor spoke, sharing sweet memories of Vanessa and gushing about how perfect Lucas was for her. Then Jack Morrison stood up. I watched him grip his champagne glass with white knuckles, watched him clear his throat twice before speaking. "I'd like to say a few words about my son," he began, his voice shaky. "Lucas has always been strong, resilient. He overcame a difficult childhood." "Difficult because you made it that way," I said quietly. Every head in the tent turned toward me. Jack's face went red. "Excuse me?" I stood slowly, my napkin placed carefully on the table. "You said Lucas had a difficult childhood. I'm simply pointing out that his childhood was difficult because you and your mother chose to make it that way." "Heather, please," David Parker murmured. "Not now." "Then when is the right time to tell the truth?" I turned to address the room. "I apologize for interrupting, but if we're sharing memories and stories about Lucas's life, I think mine deserve to be heard too." Lucas shot to his feet. "No, absolutely not. You don't get to what to speak to exist." My voice was steady, firm. "I've been silent for 22 years, Lucas. I'm done being silent." The tent had gone completely quiet. Even the string quartet had stopped playing. I turned to face the crowd, 200 guests all staring at me with rapt attention. "My name is Heather Morrison," I began. 22 years ago, I was convicted of embezzling money from Morrison Trucking Company. I was sentenced to 8 years in federal prison. My son Lucas was 6 years old when they led me away in handcuffs, and for 22 years he has believed that I chose crime over him, that I abandoned him for money, that I am, as some have called me, wretched. I could see people leaning forward, captivated despite themselves. "But let me tell you what actually happened." Dorothy's voice rang out shrill and desperate. "Don't listen to her. She's a liar. She's trying to..." "To what, Dorothy? To tell the truth, you've spent 2 decades trying to bury..." I pulled a folder from my purse. Yes, I'd brought evidence to a wedding and held it up. I have forensic analysis proving that the signatures attributed to me on key financial documents were forged. I have sworn affidavits from witnesses admitting they were paid to lie. I have bank records showing that the secret account opened in my name was accessed from Morrison Trucking's office on days when I was provably elsewhere. Gasps rippled through the crowd. In 2003, Morrison Trucking was failing. Not because of me, I was the bookkeeper trying to keep things afloat. It was failing because my ex-husband Jack had gambling debts, because he'd taken illegal loans from dangerous people, because his business management was incompetent at best and criminal at worst. Jack had gone pale. That's not... You didn't defend me, Jack. That's what you didn't do. I turned back to the crowd. When the FBI came, someone needed to take the fall. Someone needed to be the scapegoat. And Dorothy Morrison decided that someone would be me. "You're lying!" Dorothy shrieked. "Security, remove this woman!" But David Parker stepped forward. "No, let her speak." I looked at him gratefully, then continued. Documents were forged with my signature. A bank account was opened in my name and filled with stolen money by Dorothy herself. Witnesses were paid $50,000 to testify against me. And my husband, the man who'd promised to love and protect me, stood silent while they destroyed my life. My voice didn't shake. 22 years of practice holding pain inside had taught me control. I was sentenced to 8 years. Lucas was given to Jack and Dorothy, and they made sure that every letter I sent, every phone call I attempted, every birthday card I mailed, none of it ever reached my son. They told him I didn't care, that I'd chosen money over him. They erased me from his life and then taught him to hate the memory of who I'd been. Lucas was standing motionless, his face ashen. When I got out of prison in 2011, I had $73 and nowhere to go. I worked 3 jobs. I slept in shelters. I scraped and saved and built a life from absolutely nothing. And I did it alone without help, without the Morrison family money, without anything except my refusal to stay broken. I gestured around the elegant tent. Some of you may have heard of Pearl Properties, a real estate investment company with holdings in 5 states valued at over $8 million. I built that, alone, starting with a single room in a rundown apartment that I rented out on Airbnb while I slept on the couch. Murmurs of shock swept through the crowd. I could have come forward years ago, could have hired lawyers, fought for recognition, demanded acknowledgement. But I didn't, because I needed to know. Would my son ever wonder about me? Would he ever question the story he'd been told? Would he ever try to find me? I looked directly at Lucas. You never did. For 22 years, you never once looked for me. Never once questioned whether a mother who'd sung you to sleep every night, who'd made your pancakes every Saturday, who'd loved you more than her own life, whether that mother might have been telling the truth when she screamed her innocence. Tears were streaming down my face now, but I didn't stop. I came here today not to ruin your wedding, not to seek revenge, but to give you the truth that I was framed, the truth that I was stolen from you, the truth that I never ever stopped loving you, even when you learned to hate me. The silence was absolute. You could have heard a pin drop. In 6 weeks there will be a court hearing. Evidence will be presented. My conviction will be vacated. I will be formally exonerated. And Dorothy Morrison will be investigated for the crimes she actually committed: fraud, forgery, witness tampering, and obstruction of justice. I set the folder down on my table. You can verify everything I've said. Detective Sarah Williams. I gestured to Sarah, who'd been sitting quietly at a table in the back, has investigated this case independently for 2 years. Every piece of evidence is documented and verified. I turned back to Lucas one final time. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't expect a relationship, but I demand to be seen, to be acknowledged, to have my truth heard after 22 years of silence. My voice dropped to barely above a whisper, but in that silent tent everyone heard. I am not a criminal. I am not wretched. I am a mother who was torn from her child by people who cared more about protecting their reputation than about telling the truth, and I refuse to be invisible anymore. I picked up my champagne glass and raised it. To Lucas and Vanessa, may your marriage be built on truth, not lies, because lies, no matter how carefully maintained, always crumble under the weight of reality. I drank, set the glass down, and sat. For 5 seconds, no one moved. Then Lucas exploded. Lies. Lucas's voice cracked like breaking glass. You're lying. All of this is lies. He lunged toward my table, and for a moment I thought he might actually attack me. Vanessa grabbed his arm, but he shook her off. You went to prison. You're a convicted felon. You can't just walk in here with some fake documents and rewrite history. Lucas David Parker tried to intervene. No, she doesn't get to do this. She doesn't get to ruin my wedding with her victim story. He was pointing at me, his hand shaking. You abandoned me. You chose crime over being a mother, Grandmother told me. Grandmother lied to you, I said quietly. She didn't. She wouldn't. She raised me. She was there when you weren't. I wasn't there because I was in prison for a crime I didn't commit. I wasn't there because your grandmother made sure I couldn't be. Lucas turned to Dorothy, his face desperate. Tell them. Tell them she's lying. Tell them. But Dorothy wasn't looking at Lucas. She was staring at her lap, her hands trembling in her wheelchair. Grandmother. Lucas's voice went small childlike. Tell them. Dorothy looked up, and for the first time in 22 years, I saw fear in her eyes. Real, genuine fear. I did what I had to do, she whispered. The business was failing. Jack's debts were going to destroy us. Someone had to... Had to what? Lucas shouted. Had to frame my mother. Had to send an innocent woman to prison. Had to take a child away from his mother. You don't understand. No, I do understand. Lucas's voice broke. I understand that you lied to me. For my entire life. You told me she didn't want me. You told me she chose money over me. You told me she never wrote, never called, never tried to see me. She didn't deserve you. That wasn't your decision to make. The tent was silent except for Lucas's ragged breathing. Vanessa approached him cautiously, her hand on his arm. Lucas, honey, we should what? He whirled on her. Should what? Vanessa should pretend this isn't happening, should smile and cut the cake while my entire life turns out to be a lie. I know you're upset. I'm not upset. His voice broke completely. I told everyone she was dead. I told you she was dead. I told myself she was dead because it was easier than admitting I had a mother who didn't want me. Except she did want me. She was just in prison. For something she didn't do. He turned to Jack, who'd been sitting frozen throughout the entire exchange. Dad, tell me this isn't true. Tell me you didn't know. Tell me... Jack couldn't meet his son's eyes. I didn't know at first. I swear, Lucas, I thought she was guilty. But later, when Patricia Hayes came to me, when she told me what Mother had done, I should have come forward. I should have... When? Lucas's voice was deadly quiet. When did you know 10 years ago? Maybe 12. 10 years. Lucas stumbled backward. You knew for 10 years that she was innocent, and you said nothing. I didn't know for sure. You knew enough? You knew enough to have doubts, and you said nothing. Lucas was crying now, tears streaming down his face. How could you? How could you let me grow up hating her? How could you let me believe she abandoned me when you were the one who abandoned her? He looked around the tent wildly at the 200 guests, watching his complete breakdown, at his new wife crying in her wedding dress, at his grandmother shrinking in her wheelchair, at his father unable to meet his eyes. And then he looked at me. I told you that you were wretched, he whispered. I called you that. To your face. When you were innocent the whole time. I stood slowly and walked toward him. He didn't move away. Lucas, I helped destroy you, he said, his voice breaking. I became part of what they did to you. I told everyone you were a criminal. I told Vanessa you were dead. I erased you just like they did. You were a child. I'm not a child anymore. He looked at me with anguished eyes. I'm 28 years old. I should have questioned. I should have looked for you. I should have... His legs gave out. He sank to his knees right there on the dance floor in his tuxedo, surrounded by wedding guests. Vanessa dropped beside him, her arms around his shoulders. I knelt too, my navy suit and expensive pearls touching the ground. Lucas, I said softly, look at me. He raised his eyes. For the first time in 22 years, my son really looked at me, really saw me. I don't hate you, I said. I'm angry. I'm hurt. But I don't hate you. You were 6 years old when they took me away. You were a child being raised by people who fed you lies. That's not your fault. But I'm not 6 anymore. No, you're not. And what you do now, that's your choice. You can hold on to the lies because they're familiar, or you can face the truth no matter how painful. I reached out slowly and touched his face. I don't need your forgiveness, Lucas. I need you to know the truth, that I never left you. I was taken from you, and I fought every single day to get back to you. His face crumpled. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I know. I don't know how to fix this. You can't fix 22 years in one night, but you can start by accepting what's real. Around us, the tent was utterly silent. 200 people watching a mother and son try to find each other across an ocean of lies and lost time. Vanessa stood slowly, her wedding dress trailing across the floor. Her makeup was ruined, her eyes red and swollen. She looked at Lucas, then at me, then at David Parker. I need to speak, she said, her voice surprisingly steady. Lucas looked up at her. Vanessa, I'm sorry this is your wedding day and I've ruined it. No. She helped him to his feet. You didn't ruin it. The lies ruined it. The lies that existed long before today. She turned to address the guests. I'd like to say something if I may. David nodded encouragingly. Vanessa took a breath. When Lucas and I started dating 3 years ago, he told me his mother had passed away when he was young. He said he didn't like to talk about it because it was painful, and I respected that. I didn't push. I didn't ask questions. She looked at me. 6 months ago, my father told me he'd worked with a real estate investor named Pearl. He spoke highly of her, said she was brilliant, hardworking, ethical. I never made the connection. Why would I? Lucas's mother was dead. A bitter laugh escaped her. Except she wasn't dead. She was right here in Chicago building a business empire, surviving against impossible odds. And my fiancé, my husband, had convinced himself she didn't exist. She turned to Lucas. I love you, but I will not start our marriage based on lies. Not lies from your grandmother, not lies from your father, and not lies you tell yourself to avoid pain. Vanessa, I need you to make a choice, Lucas, right now, in front of all these people. Her voice was firm. You can choose to keep believing the comfortable lies. You can choose to shut your mother out and pretend this never happened. You can choose to go back to the version of reality where you're the victim and she's the villain. She paused. Or you can choose the truth. Even though it's messy and painful and complicated. Even though it means accepting that the people who raised you lied to you. Even though it means acknowledging that you played a part in perpetuating those lies. Lucas stood there trembling, caught between his past and his future. What do you want me to do? He whispered. I want you to be honest. With me. With your mother. With yourself. Vanessa's voice softened. I want you to stop running from pain and start facing it. Because that's what adults do. That's what husbands do. She looked at me, tears in her eyes. Mrs. Morrison, Heather, I am so sorry. Sorry for what was done to you. Sorry that my wedding became the venue for this confrontation. But I'm not sorry that the truth came out. Because I refuse to build a marriage on lies. I stood and walked to her, taking both her hands in mine. You're a brave woman, Vanessa. Braver than I was at your age. Lucas is lucky to have you. I don't feel brave. I feel terrified. She squeezed my hands. But I also feel clear. For the first time since this whole mess started, I feel clear. She turned to Lucas. So what's it going to be? Lucas looked at Vanessa, then at me, then at Dorothy and Jack. I don't know how to do this, he said finally. I don't know how to just erase 22 years of believing one thing and start believing something else. You can't erase it, I said gently. You can only move forward from where you are. But where am I? His voice was lost, childlike. Who am I if everything I believed was a lie? You're Lucas Morrison, my son, a man who made mistakes because he was lied to, but who now has the chance to make different choices. What if I can't? What if I'm too angry, too confused, Then we start there, with anger and confusion. We don't have to jump to forgiveness or reconciliation. We just have to start with honesty. Lucas was quiet for a long moment. Then he turned to Dorothy. You need to confess, he said, publicly. You need to tell the truth about what you did. Dorothy's face hardened. I will do no such thing. I protected this family. You destroyed this family. You sent an innocent woman to prison. You took a mother from her child. You lied to me every single day of my life. Lucas's voice was steel. If you have any love for me at all, any respect for what I've been through, you will tell the truth. Now. Dorothy looked at Jack. Don't you dare, she hissed. We'll be arrested. We deserve to be arrested, Jack said quietly. It was the first time he'd spoken with any conviction. Mother, I've lived with this guilt for 10 years. I can't do it anymore. I won't do it anymore." He stood and faced the crowd. "My mother, Dorothy Morrison, orchestrated the fraud that sent Heather Morrison to prison. She forged documents. She paid witnesses to lie. She opened bank accounts in Heather's name and then reported them to the FBI. I didn't know at first, but when I found out when Patricia Hayes came to me 12 years ago and confessed what had really happened, I stayed silent. I chose protecting my mother over protecting the truth. I chose my own comfort over my son's right to know his mother." His voice broke. "I am guilty, of cowardice if nothing else, and I'm sorry. To Heather, to Lucas, to everyone we've hurt with our lies." Dorothy was crying now, her face buried in her hands. "You're ruining everything." "You already ruined everything, Grandmother," Lucas said coldly. "We're just finally admitting it." He turned back to me. I can't say I forgive you because you didn't do anything that needs forgiving. You were the victim. I need you to forgive me. For believing them. For hating you. For calling you wretched when you were the strongest person in this entire mess." "Lucas, please, I need to say this." He wiped tears from his face. "I don't expect you to want a relationship with me. I don't expect you to trust me, but I'm begging for a chance. To know you. To hear your story. To understand who you really are, not who they told me you were." I looked at my son, 28 years old, broken open, finally willing to see the truth. "Yes," I said simply. "We can start there." He stepped forward and hesitantly opened his arms. I walked into them. For the first time in 22 years, I held my son. We stood there on the dance floor, both crying while 200 guests watched in absolute silence. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't healing. It wasn't resolution. But it was a beginning. My penthouse dining room table was set for 8. Good china, crystal glasses, centerpiece of autumn flowers that Vanessa had arranged that morning. I stood at the window looking out at Chicago, thinking about how far I'd come. How far we'd all come. The exoneration had been granted in October 2025, exactly 6 weeks after the wedding. Front page news this time. Morrison conviction overturned. Evidence proves frame job. Dorothy Morrison had been arrested and charged with fraud, forgery, and obstruction of justice. At 82, confined to a wheelchair, she'd been sentenced to 6 years in federal prison, the same prison where I'd served my time. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Jack had cooperated with prosecutors in exchange for a reduced sentence, 18 months plus restitution. He was currently serving his time at a minimum security facility downstate. And Lucas? Lucas was trying. The doorbell rang. I opened it to find Lucas and Vanessa, her hand resting on her visibly pregnant belly. "Mom," Lucas said, and the words still made my heart clench every time. "We brought pie." "Come in. Aunt Pearl's already in the kitchen terrorizing my cooking." Vanessa laughed and hugged me. "How are you feeling?" "Grateful, overwhelmed, happy." Over the past year, Lucas and I had met once a week. Therapy sessions at first with a counselor mediating, then coffee, then dinner. Slowly, carefully, we'd begun to know each other. It wasn't easy. There were sessions where he'd gotten angry, where I'd cried, where we'd both questioned whether this was worth the pain. But we kept showing up. And slowly the man emerged from behind the lies. My son with my stubbornness and my sense of humor, with talents and dreams I'd never known about, with a life that had nothing to do with me, but that I was grateful to witness. David Parker arrived next with his wife Helen, then Detective Sarah Williams, who'd become a dear friend, then Richard Thompson, my lawyer, who'd guided me through the exoneration process. We gathered around the table, this mismatched family built not by blood, but by truth. Aunt Pearl, 90 now but still sharp, raised her glass. "I'd like to make a toast," she said, "to Heather, who taught us all that survival isn't just about staying alive, it's about staying true." "To Heather," they echoed. I stood, my own glass raised. "To all of you, who stood with me when it would have been easier to walk away, who chose truth over comfort, who believed in justice when the system had failed." Lucas stood too. "And to second chances, to new beginnings, to families that are built rather than born." He looked at me, and I saw in his eyes something I'd thought I'd never see again: love. Complicated, imperfect, still healing but real. "To Mom," he said quietly. "The strongest woman I know." Vanessa squeezed his hand, tears in her eyes. We drank, we ate, We laughed. And later, after the dishes were cleared and the coffee was served, Lucas pulled me aside. "Vanessa and I have been talking," he said, "about the baby, about names. Oh, if it's a girl, we'd like to name her Pearl, after Aunt Pearl, and after you, the woman who built Pearl Properties from nothing." I couldn't speak. Tears streaming down my face, I could only nod. "And if it's a boy, we were thinking, Heather's maiden name. What was it? Davis. My father was John Davis." "Then John Davis Morrison. So that part of you lives on." I pulled him into a hug, this man who was once my baby boy, who'd been stolen from me and poisoned against me, who'd found his way back through pain and truth and courage. "Thank you," I whispered. "No, thank you. For never giving up. For surviving. For being strong enough to demand your truth even when it would have been easier to stay invisible." We stood together at the window, watching the Chicago skyline light up against the November dusk. I thought about the woman I'd been 23 years ago. Broken, imprisoned, erased. And I thought about the woman I'd become. Heather Morrison. Successful. Vindicated. Seen. They'd called me the wretched woman. For years I'd carried that name like a scar. But scars are proof of survival. Proof that you faced something that tried to destroy you and lived anyway. I wasn't wretched. I never had been. I was a survivor. A fighter. A mother who'd walked through fire and emerged not unscathed, but unbroken. And that I realized was enough. More than enough. It was everything.